Class students. I'm so happy to be with you today and to share this lesson with you. I'm really excited to have this conversation. So to begin, I want to teach you the phrase, hindsight is 2020. It's an interesting phrase, and I'm going to give you an example of how you could use it before I describe what it means. So let's just say your sister or your brother is dating someone, and the person they're dating is really rude, they're not nice to them, and so they date, eventually they break up, and afterwards your sibling tells you, I can't believe that I dated them. You might say, well, hindsight is 2020. Now, the 2020 refers to having perfect vision, and hindsight is this idea of looking back or reflecting on things from the past. So when we look back on situations in the past, we see things clearly that were not clearly at the time. It's easier to analyze and evaluate situations when we're looking back on them than in the present moment. That's what hindsight is 2020 means. Now, Jesus's followers had a moment kind of like that. So throughout Jesus's life and ministry, and even more throughout the entire scriptures, there was this story. They knew what needed to happen to the Messiah, but yet when it happened to Jesus, they were shocked. They were not expecting him to need to be crucified on a cross to die. They thought that he would reign in a very different kind of way. So what we're going to do today is I want to tell you some of the stories that happened after Jesus died and came back from the dead. I want to tell you about the ways that Jesus appeared to his followers and how the people who followed Jesus began to see, oh, hindsight is 2020. This needed to happen in this way. To begin, I want to remind you of where we've been. So we talked about how at the beginning of the world, God created. And God created humans and made them in God's image. And they were to rule and to reign with God in this garden that had perfect relationship with God, with others, with self, with creation. It was all well. But the humans, they chose to sin. They decided that they wanted to have control. And when they did, death and sin entered the world. But even as this happened, God made a promise, which is represented in this image here. God promised that one day from their family line, a descendant would come, and this descendant would crush the head of the serpent, while the serpent bites the heel of the descendant. It was a very confusing promise, but a promise nonetheless that one day death would be overcome, while the descendant also takes death into themselves. The story that we told last time ended here with this image. Jesus, the descendant, we find out he is the one that the people have been waiting for from the family line of Adam and Eve, Abraham and David. He is the one who has fulfilled all that the prophets have written about. He ends up taking sin and death into himself and is crucified on a cross in one of the most shameful and humiliating ways that someone could die at that time. And we reflected at the end of our story that it really feels like the serpent has won. But today we're going to figure out how that's actually not the case. 3 days after Jesus' death, some women went to the tomb heartbroken. They had just watched their Messiah, their teacher, their friend be killed a couple days ago. They watched him be whipped, carry his cross, breathe his last. They saw him humiliated. With his death came the end of their hope. This different kind of kingdom Jesus described couldn't stand a chance anymore. One where women, children, people who were sick, people who were Gentiles, people who were poor or imprisoned or tax collectors all had a place around Jesus' table, in Jesus' circle. And Jesus seemed so powerful, the way he healed the sick, the way he spoke with so much compassion, the way people in power feared him. But he was gone, and their dreams were gone. They arrived at the tomb early in the morning on the first day of the week. They brought fragrant spices to keep Jesus' dead and decaying body from smelling. But when they arrived, they saw something shocking. The large stone was rolled away from the tomb, and the women slowly stepped inside. They saw two mysterious figures. They were frightened, and the figures told them that Jesus had risen from the dead. They reminded the women of what Jesus told them, that he must be handed over to sinners, crucified, and on the third day rise again. They remembered Jesus' words with wonder. Then they ran from the tomb and reported everything that happened to the 11 apostles and to the others. But everyone thought that what they were saying was nonsense. They didn't believe them. He can't be alive, they thought. We just saw him dead. Only Peter went to see for himself. He ran to the tomb, and when he went inside, he saw only the linen cloth. But he returned home wondering what had happened, as if the women hadn't just told him. Then just outside of Jerusalem, a couple of Jesus' followers were leaving the city and traveling on a road to a town called Emmaus. They were sad and confused about everything that had happened. Then Jesus began walking alongside them, but they didn't recognize him. So they told this stranger about Jesus. They described him as a powerful prophet who they expected would rescue Israel, but was instead executed. They even told him how some women say he's alive, which is crazy. It's all too much, so they were going home. Then the stranger, Jesus, explained that this is what the Jewish scriptures have been pointing to all along, that Israel needed a king who would suffer and die as a rebel on behalf of those who are actually rebels. And then the people would be cleared of all sin by his resurrection, so he could give true life to those who would receive it. The followers were still confused. Then they all sat down for a meal. When Jesus took the bread, blessed it, broke it, and gave it to them, just as he did at the Last Supper, their eyes opened and they recognized Jesus. But he disappeared and the scene was over. And then the last story, where Jesus and all his disciples got together over another meal. Everyone was freaking out about Jesus' resurrected body. He was human, but he was so much more. He had scars on his hands, but he was able to walk through walls. He passed through death and came out on the other side a walking, talking piece of new creation. Jesus told them that he was going to give them the same divine power that sustained him, so that they could go out and share the good news of God's kingdom with others. He explained what he had told them while he was in his ministry, that everything written about him in the law of Moses, the prophets, and Psalms needed to be fulfilled. And he explained how the Messiah needed to suffer and rise from the dead on the third day, and that repentance and forgiveness for sins was to be preached in his name to all the nations. I have two questions that I want you to think about after hearing this story. The first is, what did Jesus do in this story? And the second is, what did Jesus tell his disciples during his lifetime that they did not understand? What did Jesus say needed to happen? You can pause the video here to ponder these questions. So for the first question, what did Jesus do in this story? There are some smaller answers and then one big answer. So we know that Jesus appeared to his disciples after he rose from the dead. So he walked with them on the road to Emmaus. He told them about what needed to happen to him. He broke bread with them like he did during the Last Supper. He ate with them and told them about the details of the new creation. But the big thing that Jesus did is that he rose from the dead. He conquered death. Now, the second question, what had Jesus told his disciples during his lifetime that they did not understand? What did Jesus say needed to happen? Jesus told them that he must be handed over sinners to be crucified, and on the third day he would rise again. He said that Israel needed a king who would suffer and die as a rebel on behalf of those who were actually rebels, and that they would be cleared of all their sin by his resurrection, that he would give true life to those who would receive it. He told them about how everything that was written in the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms would be fulfilled about him, and that repentance and forgiveness for sins would be preached in his name to all the nations. Now, I bet the disciples thought, how have I missed it? But hindsight is 2020, like we said earlier, right? In the moment, Jesus' disciples couldn't believe what had happened to Jesus. They were crushed. They thought their dreams ended. They were leaving town overwhelmed. He was dead, no question. Their hopes of him ushering in a different kind of kingdom were gone. But after Jesus had risen and he explained what needed to happen, it was so clear. Not only had Jesus told them while he was alive that he would need to die and rise, others before him had said the same. From even before Abraham, it was clear that the Messiah would die. The snake would bite his heel as he crushed the snake's head. So the snake biting his heel was this death, this crucifixion of Jesus, but him crushing the snake's head was him rising back from the dead. Moses, the prophets in the Psalms predicted the same. Jesus died, but he rose again. By sacrificing himself, Jesus took in all the evil of the world and overcame it at its source. He ushered in the new creation, something that we are a part of now and something we will continue to explore together.